Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Work to Wealth podcast. I'm Taylor here with my co host Faith, and we have some awesome guests that we're excited to talk about. We're always excited to talk to our
Yes.
guests because they're awesome. That's why we're bringing them on the podcast. So we have Jess and Jacqueline from Payment for Placements, and yeah, this conversation is going to be so great. We know, Faith and I are just also really passionate about social workers in general, getting paid their worth, and this starts in our internship. So I'll just have Jess and Jacqueline, give us an intro on who they are and why, how they got into P4P.
Oh, great. So my name is Jess, and I have an interesting kind of route actually for how I got involved with the payment for placements movement. I moved to Michigan from Texas and actually worked for the National Association of Social Workers Texas chapter as their community engagement coordinator. So I was a community organizer in the state of Texas on behalf of social workers. Had a side passion for advocating for paid placements. And somehow they let me run with that. So I I was able to really like work with P4P chapters across the state to organize a statewide coalition, brought together a working group of administrators, educators, students who were involved in this work, and actually utilized that to write the foundations of a piece of legislation that got filed in 2023 in Texas. So
So
my
cool.
background, yeah, thank you. My background actually is working as a staff member through NASW to support P4P before I even got to my master's. And so now, being at the University of Michigan, have stepped into the co-chair role. And a lot of that, foundation for why I wanted to join is just the foundational belief that social workers deserve to be paid their worth, exactly like you said. It starts an internship, it's a devaluing practice, it's outdated, and we need to
Oh,
have
it's outdated
it's
I love
outdated.
that.
completely.
It is
Yeah,
archaic.
It's archaic.
social work is no longer a volunteer position, it's a profession,
Yes.
and we deserve to be
Yes.
treated with respect. And put your money where your mouth is how I feel about it, right? And so, yeah, there was just motivation because I was in unpaid internships. I had a small stipend in my BSW internship of $500, and I felt like I was on top of the world because I got paid $500 for an entire year of work. Um, but the reality is that a lot of our, nonprofits and agencies that we work for are underfunded. And so it is complicated when it comes to practicum specifically, when it comes to social work internships specifically. There are different challenges, and so we need to have creative solutions to those. And I got involved to help discover those creative solutions.
That's
That's
awesome.
that is
That's great.
seriously amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
That's awesome, Jess. That and it's so cool that you have that lens of being a staff member at NASW. I think that that's a strong partnership, and that's pretty cool that NASW Texas is supportive of the movement. Um,
Yeah, that's encouraging.
That is encouraging.
Yeah. What about you, Jacqueline?
I'm so excited to be here. It's my first ever podcast, so this is exciting and nerve-wracking. But thank you, Taylor and Faith, for bringing attention to this really important issue and giving Jess and I the chance to come and share more about the work we do. Just representing two chapters in, I think we have over 50 P4P chapters now across the country, which is really exciting. So I'm Jacqueline. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in my third and final year of the MSW program at San Diego State University. I've been involved with the SDSU P4P chapter since I started my program. I came to join P4P because when I started my program, I was a part-time student because I was still working full time to, make ends meet, keep it going because of the issue that's bringing us here today, but also because I really loved the work I was doing. And so I was still working full time for an organization called Southern Policy Initiatives, where it's a local research and advocacy organization here in San Diego that works that advocates for workers' rights. So for 5 years, I was doing resource development and organizing around the intersection of race, class, gender, strengthening local ordinances and protections for workers, paid sick leave, living wages, all of that to really elevate the dignity of working families here in San Diego. And so coming into my MSW program, I always already had this lens of valuing work and workers, and also coming with the principles of the labor movement and our history of organizing in this country and what it means to build community power, build worker power, to have the voices of everyday working people be heard. And so when I started my MSW program and I had heard rumblings that the P4P chapter at SDSU was starting, I thought, okay, this is something I have to get involved with. It's a chance for me to live my values within the MSW program. I thought I would just do the program as a working student, go to class, get the degree, and move on. I wasn't really planning to get involved with any organizations or anything like that. But when I heard about P4P, I thought, okay, this is a chance to do some organizing within the program. And SDSU was one of the first, following University of Michigan, to sign on to the mission statement. And it's been an interesting 3 years of organizing with administration while also trying to build a coalition with California chapters across the state. But it's been a very meaningful experience for me to be able to advocate in this way, to talk to students, talk to my peers over the last 3 years, hear their stories of how unpaid field placements has been really challenging for them, and be a part of some, it's a slow process. We're moving the needle, but we've had a number of petitions, we've had, town hall meetings, info sessions, and right now we're at a point where we're really trying to build relationships with administration to do that education piece, that orientation to why this is so important. With not just with students, but with our administration to really hear us. So I'll stop there, but really love this work, and glad that we get to be talking about it today.
That's so great. Thank you both for sharing your individual experiences and your stories with us, and for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. We had on the podcast Pilar and Aiden, who also are part of P4P, and they really did a great job kind of breaking down the main core issues as to why it's important that we pay social workers, how this is, a core issue that needs to change, and the reasons for that. And today we'd love to pick your guys' brains on what are some of the strategies and solutions that you guys have used in your chapters that you would encourage other chapters to use to get change, right? To get movement. And so I guess the first question that we have for you guys is, what are the strategies that have worked to convince stakeholders to get social workers paid or to get interns paid? So kind of just starting there, I know you might, I don't know what you guys will bring to the table, but we'd love to hear solutions.
Great. I can go ahead and start out. So it is few and far between, but the University of Michigan has established a field fund for social work students.
Fascinating.
That
awesome.
came out of our advocacy and the founders of our P4P chapter and their work. And I wasn't around for the creation, but from what I understand, the kind of story to be is the tools that we utilized were a pledge or a petition that folks would sign on to, and we have hundreds of signatures from students who have been in unpaid placements or believe in, payment for placement. And so that combination with a walkout, a protest, was really how we convinced the School of Social Work that this was so important that they needed to act. Because the conversations and the complaints and the concern from students has been around for much longer than P4P has ever been around. But those two tools, the petition or the pledge, in combination with the activism, really sent the message home, and that led to the creation of the Field Fund. Now, the other side of it is that Michigan also has the SMART bill. And SMART stands for the Student Mental Health Apprenticeship Retention and Training Grant program. And so essentially that was a lot of NASW Michigan and their work on unpaid practicums, which was really essential, but it was done, in partnership with P4P. And so that was a great strategy. And I think the reason that it was successful was because it was specific to an area of social work that we have gaps in, that we have a underdeveloped workforce, and because there was a commitment to staying in the state post-graduation to continue that work. That gets tricky because in my dream world, we're paying all BSW and MSW students a living wage, regardless of whether they stay in the state and regardless of the field or practice that they're in.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So I think that is where we're headed next, and I can talk about that later. But essentially, I think that the reasons it got passed was because of some of those like more hyper-specific reasons. But that was highly successful. So students who are working in schools right now are able to, school social workers are able to get paid through the state.
Wow.
And then we have the small and needs-based fund within the school social work as well. Now,
Yeah.
a lot of work to do, but those were our two big wins.
I'm curious
That's
about
great.
the fund. Two things. The fund. Like, how does that look? Does everyone who's an intern do you have to apply for it? Does everyone just
Apply.
get paid? You have to apply for it? Okay.
Yes, and I will say there are some issues with the education about the field fund, because when I first got here, I was asking about it, and it was communicated to me that it was to be utilized for students who have transportation needs, like if they are traveling very far for their internship, they can get reimbursement for that travel. That's actually only one piece of it. The other piece is that it's needs-based, and they work with financial aid to determine your needs-based status and how much money that they can give you based on the amount in the field fund. I don't believe that there's kind of a commitment to a certain level of stipend or a certain level of hourly wage. I do believe it's based on how much is available and each student being assessed individually. But
So
yeah,
this is money that goes straight into the student's pocket,
Yeah.
like for whatever they need to use it for. That's
Yes.
kind of nice.
How is the field fund funded?
I believe it's through alumni donations.
Okay.
Okay.
And that is where we're headed is in terms of the organization as well, working with the development office to build that field fund and doing some work on the fundraising side of things to actually support that work. So we're going to be little fundraisers after a while. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. We,
Yeah.
have had some struggles with some of our other strategies, but that's been one that I think they're open to. We've had support from the development office verbally, and so just needing to see how that partnership plays out.
Yeah, and I wonder, maybe you already know this, but I'm just curious, like, if when they get donations from alumni, for this fund, does it have to be only from social workers, or is it like we have a pool of money from alumni and they have a budget on how they're allocating the money, because that would be
Yeah.
awesome if it could be just a pool of
Any
money.
alumni.
And yeah, because also social workers were not all able to give back.
We're not rolling in it. I don't know.
Not rolling in
It's
the
hard.
dough.
Yeah, so that's
yeah.
I do wonder about that as well, kind of what the process is. I understand that, so the development office is within the School of Social Work, so whenever I think about their
okay.
alumni network, I'm
Gotcha.
assuming it's the social work alumni network.
Oh, okay.
Now,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get to the centralized strategy as well, because we're
Okay.
working on something else with central student government to establish a fund for potentially all graduate students in their unpaid internships, and that would pull from those big donors that fund through the university more than the School of Social Work.
Okay.
This is really cool to hear, like the steps, right? Because I think a lot of the time we hear about, and we're really good at breaking down the problem. And so I love hearing the solutions, and like there is hope here. There are things happening legislatively or on campus, different campuses. And like this is something that I think other states or other chapters are going to be very interested in hearing these tips. And some of the things I heard was like, make a petition or a pledge do a walkout, be bold, say this matters to us, right? And then working with the NESW kind of
Yeah.
staff members to get legislative movement potentially. But I also heard that you had to negotiate. You couldn't just say like, hey, this is what we want. You have to negotiate with, the legislative body to say, okay, we can make a commitment of having social workers stay here. Not ideal long term, obviously, as a solution, but it's kind of a starting point. And then also having this field fund. So it's kind of like this multi tiered way
Absolutely.
of navigating it. And I think that that's actually really, really great. Jacqueline, do you have anything kind of that you guys have seen, strategies or ways of kind of finding solutions to this really important issue?
Yeah, Jess, that's really incredible. We're always kind of following. We're listening to all the things that other chapters are doing to see how we can replicate in ways here in San Diego or in our region and in the state of California. Yes, something that we've been doing recently, I think I mentioned earlier, the rebuilding relationships, building and rebuilding relationships has been really critical for us. CSU is one of the oldest schools of social work in California, and in the Southern California region. A lot of the early social work schools in California are here. And so something that has been brought to our attention in terms of moving the needle for paid placements is this emphasis on collaboration. I think when we first started as a chapter, we did more petitions, talks, more talks about walkouts and protests and tabling to really raise awareness. And in those years, it was really effective in getting students really just aware that this is something that we're talking about, especially at SCSU where we're more of a clinical school. So that orientation towards organizing and systems change, it's a muscle that we've really been trying to strengthen over the last couple of years, and even working with students to talk about it. And so I've been in this program for 3 years now, and even just the transition that I've seen from my first year to now my third year of more students being willing to come out and talk about it or join the conversations around this has been really powerful to see. And in combination with that, it's that working with admin piece, right? Me doing one-on-ones with faculty to gauge their support and kind of where they see the opportunities and challenges to be. Universities are huge bureaucracies, and even if admin is wanting, if individual folks within faculty and admin are wanting to see this change, it's how do we be strategic to work within this huge bureaucracy. And so some of the challenges that we've become aware of is, especially in Southern California, we have so many programs that require internships with the same agencies. So in a way, social work schools in Southern California are also competing with MFT programs, with counseling programs, with other social work schools for the same agencies. When we think about our organizing around paid placements for social work students, like yes, P4P is focused on social work students, but really we're thinking also about how do we make this the norm for internships across the all helping professions, all professions, frankly, that require internships. So I'm thinking about teachers, nurses, MF, all programs, all professions who require this, and with social work, leading the way with this movement that we've built, but doing this in a way that also is inclusive of our peers who are in other programs that also require unpaid field placements. And so, one thing we've been really focusing on is even just conversations with field placements to have that transparency. So the one thing that we have at SDSU is every year for our advanced year placements, we have an agency fair. And as I'm talking to other chapters, I'm realizing this is not something that other chapters or other schools have. And so, I do want to shout out SDSU for the organization and the time and energy that is required to develop something like an agency fair, where all of the agencies that that take social work interns come to campus, and we have a chance to talk to them. We have a chance to ask them, like, what is it like to intern with you? Do you have a stipend, etc. SCSU School of Social Work also sends out a agency fair list to all advanced year students, or incoming advanced year students ahead of the agency fair to where they list. And this is something that I believe is a result of P4P's organizing. It didn't used to list whether the agency had a stipend or not, but I
That's
think
awesome.
2 years ago, they started to list that. So now there's that transparency for students going into that agency fair to, if that's a big deal for them to have a placement that's paid, they could prioritize those because we know, right? And we also know how much they're paid. So I think for my year, going into this year, out of 200 agencies, I believe only 30 or so had a stipend of some sort, and only a handful of that had a stipend that was more than, like Jess was saying, the $500 for the whole year, right? But it's a start, and for us, what we've learned over the last few years is acknowledging the little things. It's a slow change, and but small things like that, we want to be able to work with admin on. So that's one thing I want to highlight. The other thing is having these conversations with something that's on deck for us is developing a task force. It's something we've been asking for years, a task force of students and faculty to meet regularly to talk about these issues. Because I think it's easy for admin to sometimes feel like, oh, you want us to do all these things, but they're also understaffed, stretched thin. And for us as a chapter, as students, to say, we're willing to work with you if you can meet us halfway. Every day we have students out in agencies, we have alumni who are out in agencies where we can really have these conversations to say, what would it take for this site to be able to eventually pay an intern? Knowing that grant cycles, to write it into grants or have that change within the agencies themselves can also take time. But how do we work together around this? So building that task force, building those relationships have been a priority for us. Jess, I would love to connect with you after this about the fund because we're in early conversations about developing something similar at our school. And also, the last thing I'll say is we're also in early conversations about thinking about an hours alignment. We know there's other schools with P4P chapters who have been successful in winning an hours alignment campaign as a step towards paid placements as the norm, right? Knowing that there's steps we can take to make that more attainable sooner. So even reducing hours to the 900 that's required by CSWE would be a huge win. It frees up time for students to either get a paid part-time job or spend that time doing other things that are just as valuable. So there's a few things we're working on that we're hoping will come to fruition in the next year or two.
That's awesome. Again, like you guys are just crushing it. Mm-hmm. Like I'm sitting here, I don't know, Taylor, when we were in grad school, if something like this existed, or when we were in grad school, something like this existed, I would have loved to have been a part of this.
Absolutely.
And we just graduated too long ago, I think. Like you guys, but this is so important. It's so important. Mm-hmm. And again, some of the things I heard was that you guys are still kind of really gathering stakeholders and working on collaboration and kind of getting that movement, getting momentum with the clinical side of things. Maybe there's, some it's like a slower process because it's more clinically focused versus maybe other, campuses have a different leaning in the social work programs. But then also it's pretty amazing the different things that you've been able to do in terms of like an agency fair. Did we have that at UW?
No.
I don't
remember. And I love that
fair.
You said that they now share, if they have a stipend, because I think just that, like you said, even though it's not a lot, I think the fact that we are putting out information about money in relation to social work. And people are understanding how important that is. I love that. I wonder, I want to get kind of like in the nitty gritty a little bit about something. So, say there's an agency that, they don't have a stipend and you're wanting to kind of like start conversations with them. What does that look like? Is it hard to kind of like get meetings with them? Like what kind of conversations are you having? And maybe you can talk about just previous experience, like what's been their concerns. I'd love to just, hear a little bit about that relationship.
For us, that hasn't been the role that students have been able to lead on yet. That's kind of our aspirational goal, to be able to work closely with field, to have more of those conversations. So it's been more informal at this point. But from the informal conversations that students have had with their supervisors, their field instructors, around paying interns, the biggest challenge unsurprisingly, is funding. And a lot of our agencies, and some of our agencies are very well funded, right? If you think our larger hospitals or larger nonprofits, but several of our agencies are small shops themselves, understaffed themselves, and so a big challenge for them is funding. And so one of the ways we're wanting to approach it is how can we have it framed so that interns that are coming in are valued as much as the staff that they pay, and write into their grants, and for interns to be part of that payroll, to see as contributing labor that's valuable enough. Especially in many cases, our social work interns are doing the same work as their paid staff, right? Providing the same clinical support, seeing clients that are, then billed. A lot of the time, social work interns are doing the same work as paid staff. And so what would it take for that intern position, especially if it's an agency that has been a longtime partner of any school of social work and has received interns year after year for many years, to include us as a line item in their budget that they submit to grants, and to write it in with a wage that is a dignified wage. For us, we've been starting to do calculations around our hours alignment, right? If we were to think about the hours that we work, even at minimum wage, or ideally a livable wage, right? How much time is that? How much is that time actually costing us, right? And it makes it even more, for me, even more eye-opening when we think about the fact that we are paying tuition to work for free, essentially, right? If you think about, I don't know what it's like at Michigan, Jess, but our practicum class is the highest number of units. And SCSU isn't a tuition by unit school, but it is a whole class that we are taking, that we are paying tuition for, to then also work at an internship that may or may not pay us.
Totally.
So
That's how it was for us too in Wisconsin.
So I think it's just conversations to help agencies see the internship labor as, yes, it's learning, but it's also labor, to value that time and those contributions as much as their paid staff. And many of the agencies that we've had informal conversations with would like to get to a point where they're able to pay their interns. And so we're thinking about how can we provide the support to make that possible, whether it's providing language that can be included in grants, or to Jess's point, working with development staff, working with development offices. I was a nonprofit fundraiser for many, many years, so I know how hard it is, or it can be. But even as simple as including that intern role as a line item on a budget, right, is a baby step that I think many agencies can take.
Yeah, I love that.
That's
Thank
great.
you. Go ahead, Jess.
I do think one challenge, especially, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, is just that, like, the unpaid internship model is what they rely on to
Absolutely.
function. Especially those agencies who've been around for years and years and years. And it's,
well said.
Part of it is, the perception of whether, or not they should be paid. But the other part of it is, again, the lack of funding. But I think it's really about, like, reframing what needs to be happening, where we're headed as a profession, what's kind of this new standard. The new standard is that you pay your interns. The new standard is that you pay your practicum placement, folks. So it's just that, like, but are we talking about it like that? And so I think another piece of it is just what's needed is, and I've talked to NSW Michigan about this as well. We had some great conversations about that. But what is needed is guidance for field offices on how they're talking to their agencies about paid practicums, and so that they can be
fascinating.
Because I don't think that there's universal language right now in how we frame this issue. It's a lot. It's different at every campus. The arguments are different. How they speak about it, like encouraging it versus providing resources versus providing language. Like, we need to really, I think, reel it in, and maybe that's something that we can do as P4P National, to think about. But, like, what resources are we providing to help facilitate those conversations between field staff and placements, because it really is like, we're not the ones in those rooms. We're not the ones having those conversations.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
do think the task force is a way to insert ourselves into those spaces. So when I was talking about the success of the Field Fund, what I forgot to say is the pledge and the petition and the protest led to the creation of a task force, which led to the creation of, so it was in the middle, right? And I think that's how a lot of the work gets done, is bringing P4P into a task force situation where you can bring in faculty and administrators and student government and whoever else will be in there with you.
Yeah.
And making it a collaborative space so that we're not the only ones talking about it. So
Absolutely.
it's not isolated.
I love that task force idea because it creates it to where everyone who's coming to the table has some sort of buy-in, and we're all deciding, okay, we're coming and we know what we're going to talk about, versus, I mean, I've never been a part of these conversations in terms of advocating, but I could see it being hard to maybe get on the schedule of someone in administration that you want to talk to, and then maybe you feel a little bit like a burden, or they're just like busy and or whatever, but with the task force, it's like, okay, at 12 o'clock on Thursday, the first Thursday of the month, we're all coming together and we know that we're going to talk about this issue. So yeah, I really love that.
And the biggest issue, I
love
think, is
that
the
too,
follow
yeah.
up. Like, I can get a really good meeting and we can have a really great conversation about it, but what is the
Yeah.
action step? What is the next follow up? And so a
Right.
task force being
Yes.
recurring and
Yes.
asking those development officers or those administrators to sit on the task force as a permanent member of it
I love that.
makes sure that they show up every 2 weeks or however often we meet.
Totally.
I think that's great, because I think also we get change when we prioritize our time towards it, and we actually make it regular and consistent. And when you have a task force, you can hold, it's a level of accountability of like, hey, we talked about this, like, what, let's check in on it. Did it happen? Did it not happen? What issues did you run into? And it makes it a priority. And I also think, and maybe this is a little, I don't know, this is my opinion. So I also think there's just a generational difference here around, like, well, I wasn't paid as an intern, and now you have faculty who are in positions of power who are like, well, I wasn't paid, you need to go through the grind. Like, this is a normal kind of phase you go through. And I think
Which is
our
not.
mission, it's not, it should have never been.
No.
So I think a task force is starting to help. Well, you're bringing in stakeholders who actually agree with your mission and what you think should happen, but also maybe having those conversations with those faculty members of like shifting their mindset on the issue, which if you can shift their mindset, maybe you can shift legislative mindset too. And it's kind of like that skill, right? And then they have power to leverage with maybe different stakeholders that as a student, there's a power dynamic there. So I love the idea of a task force. I think that's great. And yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
You guys are doing that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I didn't really consider the fact about the field placements. Our field faculty person, they're the ones having the conversation with, placements, right? And so, like, what kind of conversations are they having about it? Are they even bringing it up? Because, maybe if they start a relationship with an organization, but they don't bring it up, and then, their student now is talking about it, like, I could see that coming across as weird, or there's just, I don't know, just some disconnect with, the person who's actually the representative of the school. And I wonder if there, could be some tension there. But Jess, I'd love to hear about, you mentioned earlier about this larger fun and working, what I'm talking about.
Yeah, let me get into it. So when we think about like how we're structuring demands, or how like we're going about the strategy for this next year, it's really a three-prong approach. And so I've talked about the Field Fund within the School of Social Work. I've talked about legislative advocacy at the state of Michigan. But what we're not talking about is trying to capitalize on the momentum and the resources of the larger university. So our strategy for several years has been trying to get at that endowment. We want a chunk of that endowment so bad, but they're not going to give it to us. They're really not going to give it to us. And endowments are complicated. It's really an investment portfolio. They don't like to give money out to students for things. That's not really what it's typically used for. And so, we've been banging against the brick wall trying to get that done. And so we've shifted. And our new strategy in terms of like university-wide money or donors is to work with our central student government to create a graduate student internship fund that, like Jacqueline was saying, that other professions, other schools on campus can buy into or be a part of. And especially and specifically those internships that are required to graduate. Not ones that they're just, but like the ones that are required.
That's such a good point.
Yes, and that's been a distinction because you have internships that do give academic credit, but they're not required to graduate, or you have summer internships that the student is doing on their own time. But I think what's so damaging about this is it's the requirement and the forcefulness of having to pay to work, and so. Essentially what we have then is a fund at school social work that's specific to social work students. We will eventually have a fund at the university level that multiple professions can benefit from. And then, of course, the statewide legislation that would hopefully try to pay everybody. But I think the reason it's so important to be working with your student governments, whether it's inside school social work or outside, is because they have the power to write resolutions and create these funds. But then you also are able to work with them to find donors to fund them. So instead of just focusing on the alumni of the school of social work to fund the field fund, we need to be looking at those large donors that fund the university and other programs that might be interested in funding, internships for the School of Ed, but not for social work, right? Or internships, for law, but not for social work. And so trying to think about who is in those conversations or who we can pull on to donate is going to look different at the university than it does within the school of social work. So there are different funds because they're different pots of donors, and we can message them differently. And so if we have 3 different kind of stipend or grant programs at the school, the university, and the state, then hopefully students can find a combination that gets them paid. So we have that kind of 3-prong approach that we're really pushing for. And I would like to see at the statewide level a refile of the SWIPS bill, which we filed in Texas, the Social Work Intern Practicum Stipend Bill, which did pay a living wage to BSW and MSW students, or would have paid a living wage to BSW and MSW students across the state of Texas. So I would like to see that refiled if we can, because we need a champion bill. We need something to galvanize around. Even if it doesn't pass, what we're doing is pushing the conversation that way, right? Mm-hmm. So that way, whenever you do create smaller funds like the SMART bill, or you argue for a refund of the SMART bill, it actually isn't that drastic, because what we really want is a complete and total funding of these internships. Right. So we gotta just tell them what we want. And then from there, they might be willing to concede on some other smaller areas. So that's my strategy around it, is just, I think we really need to be pushing for our dream bill, and then also letting that lead to other conversations that might seem more realistic to the legislator.
Interesting.
When you say livable wage in Texas, what was the livable wage did they have a number that they...
Yes, I think
put into the bill?
I think we were pushing for 22, but I know the SMART bill pays 25.
Okay.
An hour or
an hour?
What do you?
Wow.
An hour. Okay, that's
awesome.
actually. So this is interesting because we're bringing up a topic of paid internships, right? But then you have social workers who aren't even being paid what you just said.
Yeah.
And so that it's like, this is just a systemic system issue, and I'm like,
yeah.
Taylor and I are really passionate about getting not only obviously paid internships for so many helping professions, which you guys have already highlighted. It's like not just social workers, it's like interns need to be paid, but also for social workers in the field.
Well, what's happening is it's being devalued through internship, right? And so if you actually pay what our interns are worth
Yeah.
then the profession can reflect again
Fascinating.
what they're worth in that regard as well. So
Yeah.
I
it's a chain
totally agree
reaction.
with you.
Yeah, that's such a good
Totally
point. And I
agree.
love the idea of, when we talk about paid internships, I feel like I usually default to thinking like, yeah, the organization, you need to pay, but I love just how creative you guys are being on, trying to fund it through alumni donations and just other ways, because I think while it would be great that our organizations make enough money and have enough funding to pay us as interns, I think obviously it's unrealistic because, like you said, you guys have said before, they're underfunded. So I just love that creativity. Jacqueline, I wanted to hear about, you talked briefly about your guys' push to have this larger, I don't know if you called it coalition between like other chapters across the state. I'm curious about that and like what you see that doing.
Yeah, so California has, I believe we have 28, at least 28 accredited schools of social work. We're one of the states that has the most number of schools of social work within the state. And so what we've been trying to do is have a unified voice across the state, especially within the California State University system. I think, probably half of the schools of social work in California are within the California State University system. And while, most of the policies and are set within each individual school, I think there's power that can be built within just having that unified narrative, right? So, for a while we were working on having a California P4P, like shared talking points that we're developing, so that whether you're a student at San Diego State or you're a student at UC Berkeley or Dominguez Hills, we're all using the same language, so that we can't be pitted against each other, either intentionally or unintentionally, right? And so, when you have an entity, like when we do get to the point where we're going to advocate for legislation or really trying to build relationships with NASW California or any state agency, we're so big that if we can do the really hard work of organizing as a coalition, there's real power in that. And so, but coalition building, as you might know, takes a lot of time, energy, effort. It's on sometimes we're a really active coalition, sometimes it's really downtime, but I think there's opportunity there to build statewide power, but also for transition planning and to make sure that every year there's that narrative that is passed on to the next class. Because I think that's something that is also a challenge of this work, is that most MSW students are in the it's a 2-year program.
Right.
So it's easy for administrations to say, this class is really fired up about this, but they'll be gone in a couple years, and we'll have to deal with it. And so that's something that at least at SCSU we're really trying to address is, how do we make sure that this isn't just the same conversation starting from scratch every 2 years? How do we
Yeah.
build this institutional knowledge and power and really focus
So
on
good.
the transition planning from class to class to take it over? And so we're in that moment right now because 5 out of the 7 of our steering committee members are graduating in May. So we're really focused on talking to incoming students, new students, and we've identified a faculty member we just registered as a student organization with the university with a faculty advisor
Awesome.
who isn't graduating every 2 years, to be a part, who's
Yes.
supportive and is a part of that institutional knowledge. So whether it's at the campus level or at the state level, really sitting in, trying to establish the foundations for growing power, so that we're not starting from scratch every 2 years.
Absolutely.
And I think Michigan does a really great job of that transition power, because I feel like y'all are just as strong now as you were when you first started P4P. And I think more, part of as much as the demands are important, that institution building, infrastructure building, um,
Absolutely.
for this movement in a field that has students moving out every couple years, building alumni power. Like as I prepare to graduate in May, what is what is my role as an alumni? And I think Pilar and Aiden probably talked to you about this in their episode. We have an alumni committee. So just, over the last 3 years, I have to remember sometimes that the P4P movement is only 3 years old. And we've made a lot of progress.
Serious? I
Or
actually
4 years
didn't.
old, maybe is it 3 or 4? I think it started
I
2021 at
actually don't
University of
think I knew
Michigan.
that. Oh my
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
gosh,
not,
totally.
that it
we're
was.
in the grand scheme of a movement, we're a baby movement, but
Years,
it's,
yes.
we're going through the ebbs and flow that every movement goes through of really heavy activity and then a period of infrastructure building to get ready for another period of lots of activity. But we're only 4 years old, and the fact that we're getting to be on here to talk about this, the fact that we went from, 9 chapters when I started to now over 50, it's pretty
Wow.
incredible when I like take
That
a moment to think
is.
about it in that way. So I think I
Hmm.
moved away from your initial question
No,
a little
no.
No,
bit,
I
this is
but
think I
awesome.
think that was
I love this.
amazing, and it
Yeah.
also highlights, I think as social workers, we can get so passionate about like advocating for our clients, and we're really good at that. And I appreciate that you guys are being models for how we can advocate for ourselves, because I think we just have such a hard time doing that, and you guys are showing that we can come together and we can do cool things. And also, we're prioritizing ourselves right now. It's okay to advocate and spend time to advocate for ourselves, and I think that is so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead,
I
Jess. You
also
want?
think oh, Jess, yeah, were you going to add something?
I mean, I was just going to kind of build on the importance of organizational sustainability because it is something that's very difficult.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I've been in other student organizations in undergrad and have experienced the same challenges, right? It really just is part of the deal. It's part of the nature of this work. And I appreciate, Jacqueline, you saying we're just as strong as we have always been, but if I'm going to be transparent, I have plenty of open officer positions that I would love to have filled. So it is still difficult, right? I mean, we have a
Yeah.
handful of us that are really just keeping this work going. But every single year, you have to recruit a new
Right.
staff, essentially, a
Right.
new slate of officers, a new group of general members. You have to onboard each one of them. What we do, or what we're about to start doing, is we have a recruitment presentation. It's about 10 minutes long, and we have a spreadsheet of classes and professors, and we've identified allies specifically that will allow us in their classrooms. But we just send mass emails. We just say, we're P4P. We would love to have 10 minutes of your time. Can we please come talk to your students about the paid practicums movement and recruit for our organization? And typically they'll say yes, especially if it's a policy class, because it's really
Yeah.
relevant. But
Yeah.
we really also need those clinical students because they're the ones doing direct practice work and having compassion fatigue and feeling all of these things that are unique to those clinical internships. And so doing that recruitment presentation, making sure that you're onboarding people, making sure that you're finding times that work for them to meet, hanging up flyers, building materials in a link tree and QR codes. I mean, recruitment is half of what we do. It really, I mean, one half is advocating for paid practicums. The other half is just making sure the organization can live to see another year.
That's real. I appreciate
I
you saying that,
yes.
because yeah,
Yes.
and I'm sure that's exhausting also, right?
Yes. But
Yeah.
this is part of the dynamic, right? You are a full-time student. You have to pay astronomical amounts of money to get your master's degree. And then you're like, well, how am I going to provide for myself? And then also run a movement and then also go to my internship. And this is why movements die out, right? And then it's a short-term 2-year master's program. And so like all of these factors are working against you, and yet you're still doing the effing work. I love it. And I think I love the idea about success. I almost think of it as like succession planning. Like who's gonna replace me?
Like if you
And
were
where is
leaving a
this?
job, like
If you were
what's the
leaving a job,
transition
like
plan? Yeah.
right. What's the
That's
transition plan?
I
Who's
love
who's
that.
gonna replace me? And like what intellectual property or intellectual ideas do I need to make sure they understand, or concepts they understand, so that it helps them later in their career? And what information needs to get through? And I think about that, like they do this in tech labs all the time, or research labs, like making sure you train somebody before you hand over a lab, so that the scientific project continues. It's the exact same thing that you guys are doing. It's so brilliant. Makes total sense. And I love it. And then even the recruiting aspect and how you're being creative there, I think is really smart. I think one of the things I'm learning myself is, if I want to have a more livable wage, we need to be advocating for interns to have a livable wage, because it pushes up the whole profession. And I think the argument to current social workers is, if you want more money, care about interns making more money,
Yeah.
so that you will make more, because you're going to have this whole generation of social workers saying, like, hey, I'm not going to take that wage.
They're the bottom
And
line.
what are we going
Right.
to do? Just not exist as a profession? Like,
Yeah.
So I think that actually is a really great advocacy message, that I'm even learning myself.
Yeah.
Can I add one more thing? I'm just like,
Of course.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
So that is a great argument whenever you're speaking to other social workers, right? Because there is dissent within the profession about, like, you know, this is preparing you for an underpaid profession. And that's like a really weird thing to say, but it's true. We're like, I was unpaid, so should you. But I think the actual argument that works for legislators, that works for other people outside their profession, is that there is a workforce deficit. And if we want social workers to support our communities, we need to be building a pipeline through social work education to career, and recruiting to those schools of social work, incentivizing social work as a profession and as a degree track. And that starts in undergrad, in my opinion, is really like bringing people into that BSW, paying them to be an intern, and then supporting them through that transition to MSW through advanced standing and other shortened tracks, and then paying them again in order to get them through to a paid career in social work. And so that's the argument that we always made, was we have a mental health workforce deficit and other behavioral health workforce deficits that we need to be, you know, actively fighting against. And how we do that is we recruit people. We recruit people to be social workers. And the only way to ensure that is that they're paying them. And of course, there's the equity issue, which is that people with lived experience who would be great social workers can't afford to be a social worker. And it's not okay.
No.
Yeah,
totally not.
And then on top of that, the licensure test is racist. You know, like, we just have all of these problems.
Taylor, yes. We talked about this. Yes.
And so, yeah, I know I'm going to get on a whole whirlwind about that, so I'm not going to go there. But I think the point is that, like, there are so many people who would be a social worker if they felt like they could afford to do that. They would choose service, you know, if given the opportunity. And, you know, we know that Black and brown students are hit harder by unpaid internships. We know that especially women of color are hit harder by the financial strains that come along with having to navigate the world that we've set up for social work students. And so there's a major equity piece that some are receptive to, but I do think at the legislative level, a lot of the conversation is workforce. So they're hand in hand. I mean, workforce and equity are hand in hand.
That's great.
I love that. And it just feels so contradictory, like when you say these things of, you know, our exam is racist, like our unpaid internships are you know, our marginalized communities are the ones being affected the most. Like all of the things that we talk about in school, about these other systems, right? But all the other shit and issues that these other systems are dealing with, social work as a profession is also dealing with it. And I think that could be kind of a fascinating, I could see that being an interesting, you know, lecture or just, you know, class in social work. I think it's important for us to, you know, just evaluate ourselves and really, you know, kind of dig into, what are we doing as a profession? That would be fascinating to talk about, you know.
Well, we have the code of ethics. We're constantly evaluating ourselves and trying to be better social workers. But yet this part, where is the self-evaluation here?
Totally.
You know? And so I think that's a great point.
Gosh, I could
So
seriously, I could
good.
talk to you. Like, I have so
I
many more
know.
questions. Seriously, like, you guys are awesome. And I just
Mhm.
kind of realized during this conversation, it would be cool to have you back in, 9 months or a year or whatever and just get an update. What have you guys been doing? Like, what's
Yes.
been working? Like, that would be so awesome. I think I'm just sitting and hearing you guys talk. I'm realizing like this
Mhm.
doesn't need to be a one and done conversation with us. Like, I
Mhm.
would love for this to, continue going on. But one thing I want to hear from you guys is, students who are starting chapters at their school or their, baby chapters, or maybe they're not really sure, trying to find their footing. You two have done so much and have seen so much. What would be one thing, one or two things that you would, recommend to new chapter member, like a new chapter who's just trying to find their footing? Where should they start?
My main advice for new chapters is that don't start from scratch. There's been enough chapters at this point who have been, you know, trying things, succeeding at things, failing things, learning from those experiences, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think that's something that I found most fulfilling, is bringing new folks into this movement and sharing what's worked for us, what's not worked for us. So I would say to new chapters, find one of us, find a chapter that's been around for a while, find one of the organizers. We're all willing to talk to you. We have a very active national P4P Slack space. There's it's You're going to be able to find someone who's willing to talk you through or walk you through these early stages of it, and to share some lessons learned, share best practices, and then for you to take that back and adapt it as you need. So just for it to not feel so overwhelming, just know that there's a whole community of organizers who are wanting and willing to support you as you get a chapter up and running. So just don't start from scratch.
I love that.
Learn from us, and what
Yeah.
learn from our mistakes, learn from our successes, and let us support you
I love that because
in
yeah,
this
That's
it could
great.
be it could be totally overwhelming of like, okay, there's really no
yeah.
playbook really to organizing, right? But I feel like in a way you guys are trying to make one. Like, you start a chapter, let's do the link tree, let's start to get
We
language that you
actually
can
kind of
use.
have
Like,
one.
and I guess that's what
Yeah,
Jess you were
yeah.
that's what you're trying to pull up, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you got?
Yeah, so we do have the new chapter, the P4P new chapter guidebook, which
Oh.
does walk people through, like, where do we start is literally one of the chapters that you
I
could
love
read
that.
through.
Good.
But I think it does help to have a real conversation with a real person doing this organizing work versus just like trying to read through the guidebook and understand it on your own. I know that I'm open to, if anyone out there listening is wanting to start a P4P chapter, I will do it. I will sit down and do a Zoom training with you, and we can
Yay.
talk about it.
Yeah.
That's something that historically Michigan has been really good at, because we were the founding P4P movement. Like, that, we've taken on that role. But exactly, I think National is a great resource as well. And there are like 4 things in the guidebook that we kind of define as necessary for like a productive and maintained organization, and that are defined roles and committees. So ensuring that like you have specific roles that people fill, and it's not just a group of you trying to work without having tasks, right? 2, a well organized and shared drive. So Michigan's been really good at this. I have every meeting with admin that we've ever had. I have a stakeholder analysis of all of the faculty and organizations that we've worked with and all of the students. I have, you know, my passwords are everything, and I think that's really important, just to like make sure that you're passing on that drive. So once you start it, just know that that is something that needs to be maintained so that the next person after you can take it on. The third one is well-run meetings, and I would even say not even just well-run, but like consistent and accessible meetings, ensuring that like people have it on their calendar, that you're not just assuming that they'll show up, but making sure you're bringing them in very intentionally to participate in those meetings. Because while a lot of the work happens outside of the meeting time, That's how you keep people engaged. You gotta
Yeah.
meet regularly. You gotta bring people together and have conversations, whether it's in person or on Zoom. Just making sure that like every single week you're coming together and you're talking about next steps. And then the fourth one is multiple channels of communication. So we have an email list through Google Groups, we have a Slack, and then, you know, my officers and I have a text thread that we use as well. And so just making sure that like you're able to communicate with the masses in multiple ways. But I think what Jacqueline said, like, don't start from scratch. Talk to people who've been
Yeah.
doing it. Utilize the strategies that have been done. Set up meetings with
Yeah.
every single stakeholder and every single admin that you need to talk to. Talk to your student government. Try to figure out who's your ally and who's maybe not going to be as supportive. And start building those relationships. I think a lot of it is relationship building. Yeah, I think we talked about some cool strategies that you can pursue, right? The pledge, the walkout, like the task force, working with NASW. I think that's really key because they have lobbying power, they have resources, they have the time and the energy to be supportive in this work. And I know that most chapters are willing to do that. So those are just a few things like in the playbook that I would try to pursue or utilize. But I think really just establishing a well-structured organization where everyone feels valued and heard and like they have a specific role that they can accomplish, you know, within the organization. Even if it's, you know, being the one to write the emails. You know, we need
Yeah.
someone to write those emails.
Yeah.
You know, if it's running the social media, we need someone to run that social media. Like
Yeah.
every role is important. And, you know, there are templates and structures for like the suggested roles that a P4P chapter should have. And I think that every one of them is valuable. So just doing your best to recruit for officers and building a strong group of people to push this forward is really the first step.
So, like I said before, I could literally talk to you guys for hours about this. There's so
I
much
know.
more. But, anyways, we're going to move on to our last money moment segment where we talk, you know, we're just trying to normalize the conversation around money and failures, challenges, successes, all of those things. So, Jacqueline, I'll start with you with your money moment. What do you got?
I'll share this one because it's top of mind for me, but since I'm graduating, I just paid my last semester of tuition, and I am just
Yes.
I I'll
Oh,
never say never, but I feel like I'm probably not going to pursue any more school after this. So this might be
Yes.
my last tuition payment ever, and I'm just
oh,
very relieved to have no more tuition to pay after this.
Yeah. Congratulations of all,
that's
yeah,
so
paying
good.
that. You're about to graduate. It's so exciting. It's such a stress, you know? Like money is stressful. That's I think kind of the overarching just like issue of like money is so impactful in our lives and we need help. We need to be paid well, all of those things. But I love that for you. Congratulations.
My money moment's a little less uplifting.
That's okay.
Yeah, I guess literally just what I was going to say is that I don't have any groceries right now. And I don't know if I could afford to buy them. And that has been a struggle for me, absolutely. Um, you know, I am privileged enough to be able to not work on top of my internship, which is not the case for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I am just slowly digging at my savings, but like I have kind of a budget and an allotment that I can give myself every month, and
Yeah.
like, you know, it runs out, right? I had a friend come in last weekend from out of town, and like my boyfriend's here from out of town this weekend, so I've been like hosting and doing things, and like it's been great, but I've been spending my money, right? And
Yeah.
so just kind of shining a light on the fact that like food insecurity is very real. And it is a sacrifice that a lot of us make in these situations with an unpaid practicum. But just to also highlight the experiences of my peers, you know, my co-chair works 80 to 90 hours a week, like combined, like with
Wow.
her full-time job as a bartender, as a server, and her internship and her schoolwork, and also as a co-chair for P4P. And so, you know, while I do have some struggles related to money, it is like one of those things where at least I'm not working a full-time job, and just feeling really grateful for that because I don't know how she does it. I really don't. So I hope that she's okay with me shining a light on that experience. But the reality is that so many students are working on top of their internships, and
Oh
it
yeah.
feels almost
Yes.
impossible.
Oh
I
yeah. Yeah.
I have so much respect for those who are in that position because it takes a lot.
Yeah, no, and it's just not a situation that we, as a profession, schools, like, we shouldn't be putting people in this position to have to do things like that that literally affect our like physical and mental health, you know? But really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that because yeah, that's real and something that, maybe there's someone else out there that's experiencing that. And so appreciate you sharing that.
And it shouldn't be normal. It should not be
It's
normal.
not normal.
No.
Thank you for also saying that. It's not normal. None of this shit that we talked about today is normal. I'm sorry. Well, thank you so much, Jess, Jacqueline. This was amazing and can't wait to have you on again because this is happening. This is totally happening. Thanks everyone for listening and we'll be back in 2 weeks.